So if there's anybody that likes watches and it pains them to say you don't need a watch, I still have to say, if I'm being objective about it, you don't need a watch. And that is even more true if you're talking about the world of luxury watches. But say you do get bitten with the watch bug and you aspire to own a watch, or you're in the market for a new watch, I think when looking at it from a luxury watch perspective, if you do have your eyes set on that type of range, $5,000 is usually a budget that people will sometimes lay out to go ahead and buy a luxury watch, and I see that being one that's regularly seen. So in this video, we're gonna be looking at a list of awesome watches under $5,000. So just some things to address right before we get in. Down below, there's going to be a link to a blog with even more watches mentioned. This list got pretty long, so had a blog that will actually have over 40 watches mentioned in comparison to around the 15 or so watches mentioned in this video. So you can definitely see more there. In addition, just some ground rules before we jump in here. I set the price range between $2,000 to $5,000. If I made this everything under $2,000 as well, this would start getting pretty crazy. There'd be way too many watches on this list. And then for price, just to consider here, setting it up at retail price, just because I thought it was the best way to future-proof this video, as fluctuation a lot of times on the pre-owned market and things change all the time. But also at the end, what I'm gonna do is look at a few additional pieces that certainly should be considered. They retail slightly above $5,000, but can be found underneath $5,000 on the pre-owned markets all the time. So we'll mention those at the end, as they're absolutely great watches to choose in this range as well. Now to start us off, we're gonna be looking at different categories. The first one is going to be diver watches. And a place to start here will be actually a newer watch with Oris and their Aquis Caliber 400. So in the last few weeks, we saw a lot of just a roller coaster ride with Oris and seeing what they were gonna unveil with their new Caliber, as well as the new watch that was going to actually have it inside of it. And the Aquis seemed to be the expected choice, and it turned out that was gonna be the option that they wanted to go for. This watch comes in 43.5mm case, nice Caliber 400 within. So a little bit of backstory on this movement. You're getting a 5-day power reserve, 120 hours. You're also getting a 10-year stated service interval by Oris, and then a 10-year warranty. So that gives a lot of peace of mind when looking at a new in-house Caliber, that you could feel confident in it, knowing that it's gonna be covered. And those are some pretty impressive specs. It is residing in a price bracket where it is starting to get a little close to Tudor Black Bay territory. But to be honest, when you're looking at a finishing standpoint, if this movement does actually stand up, outside of maybe just the branding on it, and Oris sometimes retailing a little bit below Tudor, I think this is a great move by the brand. They're an independent brand. I think I cheer for Oris. I think they do a great job. I think they have a good pulse on what enthusiasts like, and I think they cater to that more than most brands do, which I'm always a big fan of. And I think this is a nice step into this world. The other upside of this, for people that are, oh man, 43mm, that's too big for me. It seems like that this, at least the size of the movement, has a lot of downward trajectory. So it looks like they can be able to fit this in a smaller variants going forward. So I could see maybe with the Aquis 39.5, very similar to what happened with the 58 in the future. So we'll see here, but I think that's a great way to start off the list. Now the next watch we have here is from Tudor, and it's a bit of a hype train. I think it is maybe a little overhyped, but I still like it. I almost kind of hate the fact that I like this watch, but the Tudor Black Bay 58. So you have both the black dial variants, and then you also have the new blue dial variant, which I've done a full in-depth review a few months back, so definitely check that one out. Really, Tudor, I mean, this watch, it just goes without being said, what it was able to do for the market. Tudor has really become the Black Bay company, but this is certainly a nice watch for many people. Is it worth paying over retail? No, I don't think so at all. But for the 39mm case, wearable lug to lug, thin case, considering what the original Black Bays and the in-house Black Bays were, and kind of had that slabbed off finish, they totally got rid of that with this watch. In-house Caliber, lengthy power reserve, variety to choose from now with the black and the blue. It's a winning watch. If you can find it at retail, it's a great choice. It's a safe choice. You can get out of it at any time if you want to change your mind, and you'll have all your money still left on the table. So you really can't go through this list under $5,000 and not include the Tudor Black Bay 58. Now next up, we have the Rado Captain Cook, and the Rado Captain Cook is probably one of the more overlooked dive watches. They kind of have that Breitling Super Ocean kind of style, but doing it in a more affordable package and more vintage style, like those old Super Oceans, which I really love. The model that we have here is the bronze dial variant, so it's gonna be a little more expensive than the stainless steel variants, which are certainly great ones to go for as well, as an alternative to these. But I love the brown dial with the bronze case. It really does pop, as well as the blue and the green dial. They have fun details with the rotating logo. This one coming with a ceramic bezel, that bronze case, glossy finish that's really just striking with those applied markers. 80-hour power reserve. And yes, it's a little bit more design forward than say something like a Doxa, for example, but I think for the right type of consumer, this is certainly a nice watch to have at least on your radar. And when looking at the landscape of Rado, in terms of where it's popular, not as much here in the United States, but in places like Pakistan, India, and places like that, it's very interesting because the culture's over there. This is the brand that people aspire to own, and this is the luxury brand that comes to mind. So if you make it in life, you get a Rado. So that's pretty interesting. And we're looking at dive watches under $5,000. Captain Cook, I think, should be in the conversation here. Now, Tudor as a brand, again, kind of has become the Black Bay company, which is kind of a bummer because actually my favorite dive watch still, I haven't pulled the trigger on one just because the case size is a little bit large for myself, but from what this watch represents and looking at Tudor's history in their history and connection to military dive watches, I think this watch embodies that former kind of persona and ethos behind the brand so well, and that is with the Pelagos. Pelagos, that titanium case, 42 millimeters. You have both a ETA version as well as on the pre-owned market, and you also have in-house calibers with that lengthy power reserve. It's definitely a cool watch. It's a tool watch, and I think with so many of the models from Rolex and Tudor going for the more glamour route and looking for that mass market appeal, it's cool to see a watch like the Pelagos still being around, but there needs to be some more love and attention by Tudor to this watch. I'd love to see either some smaller case variants, some different dial colors. It's been neglected a little bit too much, but this is a killer watch, no question, under $5,000. So you probably expected to see the Omega Seamaster on this list, the professional 300 meter, and we're certainly gonna be looking at that. If you're looking at maybe the best spec dive watch under $5,000, even giving a Rolex Submariner a run for its money at nearly half the price, yeah, it's doing that. And I think for under $5,000, it may be the best dive watch you can go for in terms of value for money standpoint. Coaxial movement, healthy water resistance on this piece from an iconic brand in Omega with an iconic line in the Seamaster. And I know that icon type of idea gets thrown around a lot, that term gets thrown around a lot in watches, but it's certainly worthy here. Case size is at 42 millimeters, but it does wear much smaller than that. The helium escape valve, only thing I don't really like about these pieces, but the finishing, the movement on this, as well as that ceramic bezel, the eye-catching wave dial on these, they are really sharp looking watches, and there's a reason why they're one of the best sellers on the market in terms of a luxury watch. Now to round out our divers here, I wanna mention a watch that, again, I think gets a little bit overlooked, and that is the Breitling Super Ocean Heritage 2. And the reason why I wanted to mention this watch is for under $5,000, the 42 millimeter variant I think has a lot of appeal for a lot of different wrists out there, and it also houses Tudor's in-house caliber within. So Tudor and Breitling exchange technologies, and it's pretty cool to see that you can actually get access almost to that Tudor dive watch collection in another brand with Breitling. And in terms of this piece overall, I think the Super Ocean is maybe my first or second favorite watch from Breitling outside of maybe the Premier B01, but certainly in the conversation. A classic dive watch, 70-hour power reserve, wearable case for the size, and on the pre-owned market can be found for some pretty good prices. So, maybe you're looking at Omega, maybe you're looking at Tudor, maybe you should start looking in the direction of Breitling, believe it or not. And I think this is a good one to look at. Now, I saw a comment in a previous video where they're saying, Teddy, you need to get off the Nomos train. You mentioned them too much. And hey guys, I apologize, but when looking at the reality of dress watches and under $5,000, I'm sorry, but I don't really know how I could not mention Nomos. Mentioning the Orion, the Tangente, and the Ludwig as options here. I'm partial to the Nomos Orion just because I own one. I've really enjoyed it over the last 4 years. And it's just a great watch. You can go for the 35 millimeter variant, 38 millimeter variant. If you're really small wrist, you can go for the 33 millimeter variant, but that's mostly, I think, for women's wrists. However, you could go that direction. A variety to choose from in terms of dials, styles you can go for. And I know they're not going to be for every single person, but in terms of what is being packed from a value standpoint, I think they're really solid. So the movement here is a Nomos Alpha Manual caliber. And these are based off of Pazoo 7001, and I say the architecture is not the actual movement itself. These are actually produced in-house with Nomos's components, basically allowing themselves to have more of a vertical actual process for creating their own watches from the ground up, and also adding a hacking feature to their movements. And from a decoration standpoint, is really, really beautiful. I definitely recommend getting the sapphire back rather than the stainless steel back, because you're gonna really be hard pressed to find a better looking movement in a watch around $2,000, give or take. Now the next watch is unfortunately a brand that is, I know, falling on some hard times, but when you're looking at what was put together with this piece, it's certainly a compelling offering from a value perspective, what they were able to do, and that is with Baume & Mercier, their Clifton Baumatic. So the real notable feature with this piece is one, I think the design is really well done, where it's falling with price around $3,000. Secondary market can be found for cheaper than that. You're getting a chronometer movement. In addition though, 120-hour power reserve, so a 5-day power reserve. This was produced in partnership with the Richemont Group's movement manufacturing arm. And what they were able to develop here, I mean, there's some really good value in terms of what this watch is. Unfortunately, Baume & Mercier from a brand equity standpoint is, I think, struggling a little bit, but there's no question this watch is a huge slam dunk in terms of value and also design. I think this is one of the more attractive looking dress watches. You know, dress watches overall, I think, is a bit of a dying breed, but if you had under $5,000 to spend, I think this is a good one to look at. So now next up, we're gonna be looking at casual watches. And I think a lot of these can be dressed up as well. So don't feel bad if there's only 2 dress watches that I mentioned, you can probably dress a lot of these up as well. And the first one we're gonna be looking at here is the Ball Engineer M Marvelite. So earlier this year, I did a deep dive review of this piece. Actually went to Kipton, Ohio, was basically the foundation for the creation of this brand in Cleveland, Ohio, right outside of Cleveland, Ohio. By Webb C. Ball. He was a watchmaker and was actually responsible for many of the railroad networks throughout the Midwest and throughout actually the entire United States. And Ball watches were on many of the conductors' wrists as a response to a tragic accident and collision of 2 trains in Kipton, Ohio. This watch comes with a 40mm case, has a lot of railway style elements to it, and with its design, you have the use of tritium, which is a really cool luminescent material. And for just north of $2,000, getting a chronometer, in-house caliber within. Pretty attractive piece. Not gonna be for everybody, because I know not everyone's gonna like that tritium tube look, as well as the counterweight and the kind of overly railroad style of this piece. But still, I think still worthy, I think, of being on this list here. So one of the challenges with Grand Seiko in the spring drive is damn, it's expensive, man. But it's very cool technology. But with making a few compromises, and I don't think it's always a good idea to make compromises. I think it's, especially in this instance, if you want to save up a little bit more, it's like $1,000, you're already paying $4,000. But hey, we're talking in the world of YouTube videos. This would definitely be one to consider. You can get in the spring drive for around $4,000. And that is with the Grand Seiko SBGA 203. So 41mm case, $4,200. Solid thickness on this, not too bad. 100 meters of water resistance to be a solid everyday wearer. And you're getting a spring drive 9R65 within, which is going to be rated to plus or minus 1 second a day in accuracy. But those are conservative estimates. Those things run honestly crazy, freakish accurate. So if you've not seen how the spring drive works, I did a deep dive video earlier this year, actually a couple months back. Really proud of that video, probably one of my favorite videos I've ever done on the channel. I'll link to it down below so you can kind of see the phenomenon that is the spring drive in action. Now, when looking at field pilot style watches, I think IWC is one of the best brands to look at. And next we have the IWC Spitfire. $4,450, 39mm case, 60 meters of water resistance, which is adequate enough for everyday wear. And then you're getting an IWC 32110 caliber with a 72-hour power reserve. This is a nice window into the world of pilot watches from IWC. Maybe not the most affordable option. Some people might not like the faux patina on this, but certainly a nice watch to consider if you are looking for a watch of this style and have $5,000 to spend. Now, to call a watch from Omega underrated is probably a bit of a stretch, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it anyway. And I'm talking about the Railmaster collection. Ever since 1957, this one was a bit of an underdog. It was kind of almost set up to fail in some ways. But I think now with some introductions or some reintroductions into the line, even with that being the case, it's still, I think, neglected a good degree, just kind of similar to the Pelagos. The watch that we have here, and the name itself, I think, goes to show that it is maybe underappreciated, the Seamaster Railmaster. So this is a watch that I pinned up and compared alongside the Rolex Milgauss. And that was honestly a couple years ago now. It may have been over 2 years ago that I did that review. Now this watch, nice wearable case, 40mm, 46.6mm lug to lug. So I can see this working on a wide variety of wrists. 150 meters of water resistance with a screw down crown, so serviceable in a lot of different environments. And then you're also getting an Omega coaxial movement within, 55-hour power reserve, sapphire crystal, nice resistance to magnetism, which of course is a calling card for many Omega watches with the Aquaterras, as well as the Railmaster series. Okay, so now for this next section, we're going to be looking at the world of chronographs and different complications. And it starts off on the lower end of our price bracket. One of the more attractive chronographs I think you can find for around $2,000. One of my favorites, did a review on it, the Hamilton Intramatic Chrono. This watch pays tribute to a vintage 1960s model, and if you are familiar with the production of chronographs and kind of the chronograph races of the 1960s and understanding that backstory, you see the significance of this piece and really what it was able to provide. And Hamilton has really been rolling out this Panda Intramatic style dial with other watches that are more affordable range in their catalog. This version though, if you're looking for a chronograph, is a really attractive one. Contains a Valjoux 7753 within, a little bit on the thicker side, and I think that is the biggest gripe with this watch, but otherwise from a dial standpoint, it's one of the best you can find in the price range. It's a great everyday wear. It could be worn with a variety of different straps and has an attractive price tag for what you're getting, in my opinion, from a great brand in Hamilton. Another brand that's in close proximity, being a member of the Swatch Group as well, Longines. And when you're looking at a brand that does a fantastic job with heritage models, Longines probably better than anybody in the business, honestly. And we're gonna be looking at the Longines Heritage Classic with this bullseye or tuxedo style dial chronograph. So this is a newer release for Longines. There's also a non-chronograph version available as well, of $3,000 price range, 40 millimeters with the case, nice 54-hour power reserve with the movement. But again, I think the star of the show here is with the dial, very similar to that Hamilton, very striking, very vintage inspired, but I think they do it incredibly well with this piece. Now, getting an in-house world time for under $5,000, that is tough to do. But if you look at Frederic Constant, you can absolutely get one. And the watch we're gonna be looking at here is the Frederic Constant World Time. This watch I did a review a couple years ago. I was impressed with the piece. I think for retailing at $4,000, but as many people know, you can usually find these on the secondary market for much cheaper if you did want to get into this world. A world time complication is very cool, and if you could do it with this level of detail and with this level of execution, I think that's even more of a winning formula. 42 millimeter case, so a little bit on the larger end, but you're getting that automatic FC718 caliber within to judge every time zone around the world. You have different dial colors to choose from, and you have that kind of real life looking globe on the center of the dial, which is really gonna up the finishing. And overall, FC from a value standpoint, despite maybe not having the greatest retention in terms of its value, is tremendous usually with what they're providing for the price in many instances. So outside of the spring drive and looking at Grand Seiko, I think one of the most loved models is with their GMT, their ivory dial, SBGM 221. This watch retailing just under $5,000 at $4,600, 39.5 millimeter case, wearable lug to lug, and an automatic in-house GS9S66 GMT movement with a 72-hour power reserve. You're also getting Zaratsu polishing on this. So really not making any compromises here in terms of the finishing on this piece. It's going to be one of the best in its class on the case as well as the dial, although it's a little bit more simple with this ivory, still very eye-catching with that GMT hand, and a lovely GMT watch to throw into the conversation here for under 5,000 bucks. Now earlier on I mentioned the idea that Breitling and Tudor exchanges some technologies. That also was there's a two-way street there, and we're actually gonna see it present here with this Tudor Black Bay chronograph. So as watch enthusiasts, I think we sometimes take for granted in-house chronograph movements. And why I think this watch is very compelling is it's featuring the B01 chronograph movement from Breitling. This movement, 70-hour power reserve, column wheel, vertical clutch chronograph, produced in-house by Breitling, and you're featuring it in a watch for sub $5,000. And why that is interesting to note is because Breitling in their watches is putting this movement in watches that are usually priced thousands of dollars more. And the fact you can get in the Tudor Black Bay dial style while getting this Breitling movement inside of it, I think there's a lot of intrigue with that and going in this direction. It's a little bit on the thicker side, but from a style standpoint, probably one of the best chronographs that you could find for under $5,000. All right, so now at the end here, just to mention a few honorable mentions of watches that retail above $5,000, but can easily be found on the secondary market for less than that. I think two of them from Omega, the obvious choices, the Omega Speedmaster and the Aquaterra. The Omega Speedmaster, when you're talking about one of the most iconic watches of all time, needs to be thrown in the conversation, but the traditional Speedmaster Professional Moon watch, you can't do much better for under $5,000 on the pre-owned market, and there are plenty of them available, especially if you go for the Hesalite version, which is gonna be a little bit cheaper. And then the other option is the Omega Aquaterra. They just made so many of these at different versions, different sizes, many of them featuring a coaxial movement within. You can find some other older generation Aquaterras for very cheap, sometimes even sub $3,000 or around that price. So there can be some incredible value. And if you're just looking for an everyday watch, wearable in pretty much every scenario, can be dressed up, dressed down, you really can't do much better than the Omega Aquaterra. And then to round it out, it's a recent watch that I covered from TAG. And I know TAG sometimes is a bit of a polarizing brand, but when they're on their game, they're on their game. And that is with the TAG Heuer Octavia Caliber 2. So in-house chronograph movement, a little bit on the thicker side with this watch. But I think when you look at the overall specs and being around $5,000, in-house chronograph caliber with their Caliber 2 column wheel, vertical clutch, I think this is one that you have to at least put on the radar. I love the vintage Heuer vibes. I mean, I don't want to tell TAG Heuer to say, hey, just drop TAG Heuer, just always go with Heuer going forward. But honestly, I think people would eat that up a lot of times, but you know, hey, it is what it is. And sometimes you can find these for sub $5,000, but if you're liking chronographs, certainly one to throw into the conversation here as an honorable mention. So guys, love to hear your thoughts. What are some of the best watches under $5,000? Please leave a comment down below. Love to see what you have in mind and where you'd be putting your money in your first luxury watch, or what you have put your money in. Also, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell icon, really would appreciate that. Also, check out the blog down below. Over 40 watches under $5,000 to take a look at, as great luxury watch choices. So definitely click that, check it out. Also, be sure to follow us on Instagram, TeddyBaldassarre.com, see some cool photos of watches, stay up to date with the content. And then in addition to that, TeddyBaldassarre.com, check it out. Full authorized dealer of over 20 brands, have hundreds of different straps to choose from. All of our watches come with a full factory warranty, one of the most trusted places online to buy a watch. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I'll see you all very soon.